$30 million. That's how much I had the day my son looked me in the eye and called me a burden. I was sitting in his garage, holding my purse on my lap, pretending not to care. He had no idea what I was hiding inside that purse. A check that could change everything. That night, I decided to test them. I wanted to know who still loved me when they thought I had nothing. So I kept my inheritance a secret and asked my family for help. I didn't do it to punish them. I just needed to see the truth for myself. What happened next changed how I saw love, family, and myself forever. Now let me tell you how it all began. My name's Lucille Garner. I'm 68 years old, and I've lived in the same house in Mapleford, Missouri, for almost 40 years. I raised my kids there, buried my husband there, and I've tried my best to keep it together ever since. It's an old place, nothing fancy, but it's home. Every time I think about leaving it, I feel like I'd be leaving what's left of my life behind. That night was my birthday. I didn't plan anything big. My son, Nathan, said they'd have me over for dinner. I didn't expect much. Just some time together, maybe a slice of cake, a few laughs. That's all I ever really want now. When I got there, the house was spotless, as always. You could smell those fake lemon candles they burned to make it feel expensive. Megan, my daughter-in-law, gave me a quick hug at the door, the kind that says, "Let's just get this over with." Nathan was already at the table talking about interest rates and insurance like it was a business meeting. My daughter Lydia came later, rushing in with her phone still in her hand, saying she couldn't stay long because the kids had homework. There was a small cake in the middle of the table, one of those grocery store ones. No candles, no writing on top. Nobody even said happy birthday. They just sat down and started eating. I tried to smile. I really did. You get used to pretending after a while. I kept my hands folded in my lap and listened to them talk about their lives. Vacations, new cars, promotions, things like that. They didn't ask much about me, but that's normal now. People stop asking once they decide your life is behind you. Then, right in the middle of dinner, Nathan put his fork down, looked straight at me and said, "Mom, you should really sell that old house. You're a burden, living there all by yourself." It took me a second to understand what he just said. A burden. Megan didn't say a word, but she nodded like it was the smartest thing he'd ever said. Lydia just stared at her plate. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. I just smiled and took a sip of water, hoping my hands didn't shake too much. I looked down at that cake, the frosting already melting under the lights. I thought about all the birthdays we'd had when they were little. Balloons, homemade cake, Tom singing off-key, the kids giggling because he couldn't carry a tune to save his life. Back then we didn't have much, but we had each other. That was enough. Now, it felt like I was sitting in a stranger's house, pretending to be someone's mother. Nathan kept talking, like he hadn't just slapped me with words. "Mom, you're wasting money keeping that house, the taxes, the repairs. It doesn't make sense. You could move into one of those retirement places. They have activities, people your age." Megan added, It'd be safer too. You shouldn't have to worry about anything anymore." That's the kind of thing people say when what they really mean is, "We're tired of worrying about you." I nodded just to keep the peace. "Maybe you're right," I said. Nobody looked at me after that. They went back to talking about work and kids and vacations. I took a bite of the cake. It tasted dry, like sugar and air, and I couldn't finish it. I kept thinking, how did we end up here? When did I stop being their mother and start being a problem? I looked around that dining room. Everything in it was perfect. The marble counters, the clean floors, not a thing out of place, except me. I didn't fit there anymore. I thought about all the years I'd worked, teaching school during the day, cleaning offices at night. I paid for their college, helped them with down payments, babysat when they needed it, never once asked for anything back. I did it because that's what moms do. You give, and you hope it means something in the end. Apparently, it didn't. When dinner was over, I stood up and said, "Thank you for dinner. I should get going." Nathan didn't even look up from his phone. "You're leaving already?" "I'm a little tired," I said. "Long day?" He nodded and went back to scrolling. Lydia checked her messages. Megan started clearing plates. Not one of them offered to walk me out. I grabbed my coat and purse and headed for the door. "Good night," I said quietly. Nobody answered. Outside, the air was cold and sharp. I pulled my coat tight and looked back through the window. They were laughing about something. I couldn't hear what. My empty chair was still there in the corner, the plate with my uneaten cake sitting right beside it. I stood there for a moment watching them, wondering when I'd stopped being part of their world. Maybe the day Tom died. Maybe long before that. When I finally got in the car, I didn't cry. I just sat there, staring at the steering wheel, trying to breathe. The word burden kept spinning around in my head like a song you can't turn off. That was the night something in me broke, but it also woke me up. I realized if they saw me as a burden, then maybe it was time to show them what a burden really looks like. Not out of anger, but out of truth. I didn't know it yet, but that was the start of everything that came after. That was the night I decided to test them, to see who loved me for me and who just loved what I could give. My house sits at the end of Willow Lane, right where the road curves and the mailboxes start to lean. The roof's a little uneven now, brown shingles with some missing on the backside, but I don't mind. When the wind blows, the branches from the old maple tree scratch against the siding, and somehow that sound feels like company. I've lived here most of my life. I moved in with Tom when we got married. We planted lilacs out front the year our first child was born. They've bloomed every spring for over 30 years. When the flowers open, the whole yard smells like the past. Sweet, but heavy too. People in town still call me Ms. Garner, even though I stopped teaching years ago. Some of my old students wave when they drive by. Sometimes they stop and say things like, "You were my favorite teacher," or "You taught me how to read." It's funny how those little things stick. Those kids remember me better than my own do. Inside the house, nothing's fancy. The furniture's old but solid. The kitchen tiles are cracked in a few spots, the kind of cracks that come from life, not neglect. The wooden table in the living room still has a few ink stains from when my students used to come over after school for extra help. I never scrubbed them out. They remind me of who I was, someone who mattered, even if only to a handful of kids. Most nights it's quiet. Too quiet. I turn on the TV just to hear another voice in the room. Some nights I talk to Tom's picture on the wall. He's been gone 7 years now, but I still tell him about my day. It helps. He was a good man, worked hard at the factory all his life. We didn't have much, but we had enough. After he passed, the bills piled up fast. His company handled everything quickly, or so I thought. I never really looked into it after they sent the first settlement. I just assumed that was it. But a few months ago, a letter came from an attorney saying they'd reevaluated his accident claim and found a mistake in the original payment. I didn't think much of it until I opened the envelope. Inside was a check from the insurance company, $30 million after taxes. At first I thought it was a scam. I held it up to the light, ran my thumb across the watermark, looked at the signature 3 times, but it was real. I sat down on the couch and stared at it for a long while. $30 million. I should have felt excited, relieved, maybe even safe for the first time in years. But all I felt was nothing. Empty. Like the world had played some strange joke on me. I thought about calling Nathan or maybe Lydia. I imagined how that conversation would go. Nathan would probably talk about financial planning. Megan would suddenly remember how much she cared about my well-being. Lydia would tell me to think about my future stability. I could almost hear their voices, all business, no warmth. So I folded the check back into the envelope and put it in the drawer of Tom's old desk. That's where I keep the important things. Birth certificates, old report cards, Tom's last birthday card to me. I locked it and sat there for a while, staring out the window. The street was quiet. The neighbor's dog barked once, then nothing. I looked around the room at the old family pictures, Nathan's graduation, Lydia's wedding, the kids when they were little. Back when their smiles weren't forced, back when they still hugged me without checking their phones first. I thought about that word Nathan used, burden. It stuck with me like a stain that wouldn't wash off. I tried to remind myself that he didn't mean it the way it sounded, but deep down, I knew he did. People don't say things like that unless they've already been thinking them for a while. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, the house so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. I thought about all those years I worked 2 jobs, saved every dollar, worried about them having enough. Now I had more money than I'd ever dreamed of, and somehow it meant nothing. I realized something as I sat there. Money doesn't buy love. It just changes the way people pretend to show it. I knew what would happen if they found out. They'd come running. Not out of love, but out of need. Out of greed, maybe. I'd be treated like an investment, not a mother. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to tell anyone. Not yet. I wanted to see how they treated me when they thought I had nothing. I wanted to see if there was still any real love left under all the politeness and distance. I whispered out loud, just to hear the words, "Let's see how they love me, when I have nothing to give." Then I turned off the lights and went to bed. The house creaked like it always did, the lilac shadows falling across the floor from the moonlight through the window. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel afraid of being alone. I was still a mother, but now I was also something else, a woman with a secret. And that secret was about to tell me everything I needed to know about my family. A few days after my birthday dinner, I decided to make the first move. I wanted to see if my kids would help me if they thought I really needed it. I sat at the kitchen table with my phone for almost an hour before I finally dialed Nathan's number. My hands were shaking a little, I don't know why. Maybe because deep down, I already knew how it would go. When he picked up, his voice sounded distracted, like he was already in the middle of something more important. "Hey, Mom, what's up?" I tried to sound small, careful, like I was asking for a favor I didn't deserve. "Sweetheart, my property taxes went up this year. I'm short about $2,000. Do you think you could help me cover it until next month?" There was a long pause on the line. I could hear him breathing, maybe scrolling his phone. Then he sighed. "Mom, you've got to manage your money better. You can't keep spending without thinking. I'll talk to Megan about it." That was it? "No, of course, Mom. No, don't worry, we'll figure it out." Just a sigh and a promise to talk to his wife. "Okay, honey, thank you," I said, trying to sound grateful. After we hung up, I sat there staring at the phone. The house was quiet except for the sound of the clock ticking and the rain hitting the window. I kept expecting the phone to ring again. It didn't. 3 days went by. No text, no call, nothing. I checked my phone more than I'd like to admit. Every time I saw a notification, my heart jumped a little, thinking maybe it was him. It never was. Just junk emails, news alerts, and a reminder from the pharmacy about my prescription refill. By the third day, I gave up pretending I wasn't waiting. I pulled a blanket over my legs, sat by the window, and just watched the rain. The sky was gray, the kind that makes everything look faded. The lilacs in the front yard were drooping from the water. I thought about how many nights I used to wait for my husband's call when he was still alive. He worked the night shift at the plant, and he always called on his break just to say, "Still breathing, still miss you." Now I was waiting for silence. My children's silence. I got up and made myself a cup of tea. The kettle whistled so loud it made the house feel smaller. I poured the water, stirred in a little honey, and sat back down. I kept thinking about the word burden. It wouldn't leave me. $2,000. That's all I'd asked for, after everything I'd done for them. $2,000. I wasn't angry, not yet. Just tired. Tired of feeling invisible. That night, I took out a little notebook I'd started keeping after Tom passed. It's where I write things I don't want to forget. Bills, grocery lists, small moments that matter to no one but me. I turned to a fresh page and wrote, Day 1, called Nathan. He said he'll talk to Megan. Day 2, no answer. Day 3, no call back. Then, underneath, I added something I hadn't written before. Maybe they've already decided I'm too much trouble. I closed the notebook and left it on the table. Before going to bed, I looked around the house. The lights were dim, the air smelled like rain, and the clock kept ticking like it always does. For a second, I wondered if this was what getting old really meant. Not the wrinkles or the pills or the back pain, but this quiet kind of loneliness where you start to disappear inside your own life. When I lay down, I didn't cry. I just stared at the ceiling and listened to the sound of water dripping from the gutter outside. Somewhere between the rain and the ticking, I made up my mind. If Nathan wasn't going to call, I'd call Lydia next. Not because I needed the money anymore, but because I needed to know how far their love would really go. And so, the next morning, I made another cup of tea, sat back in the same chair by the window, and picked up my phone again. This time, it wasn't about taxes. It was about finding out the truth. On the fourth day, my phone finally rang. It wasn't Nathan, it was Lydia, my daughter. Her voice sounded tired but practiced, like she'd been thinking about what she wanted to say before she even called. Mom, I talked to Nathan. He told me about the taxes. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to hear what kind of tone she'd use. I could tell a lot from that. She sighed into the phone. Mom, you can't keep that house. It's too big, too much maintenance. You're stressing yourself out for nothing. I looked around the room while she talked. The curtains were open, the afternoon light spilling across the table. The house looked peaceful, not like the burden she was describing. "It's the home your father built," I said quietly. There was a pause. Then her voice sharpened just a little, still polite but firmer. "And it's becoming your prison, Mom. You can't keep holding on to the past. It's not healthy." I smiled to myself, though she couldn't see it. "My prison," she said. That word stung more than I expected. I wanted to tell her that this house wasn't just walls and furniture. It was where I raised her, where she learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where we had birthday parties and burnt dinners and Christmas mornings that started too early. But I didn't. Instead, I just said, "Maybe you're right." She sounded relieved. "Really? I've been hoping you'd finally come around. Nathan and I were talking. There's a retirement community just 20 minutes from here. They've got activities, medical staff on site, nice apartments. It would be so much easier for you." I listened, not interrupting. Her words came fast, almost rehearsed, like she'd been waiting for this conversation. "You could sell the house while the market's still good," she said. "It would give you security. You wouldn't have to worry about anything anymore." I wondered when my children started talking to me like I was a problem to be solved. "That sounds nice," I said softly. I could hear her smile through the phone. "It would be the best thing for you, Mom. You'll have people around. You won't be so alone." She said that last part gently, but it landed heavy. "You won't be so alone." I looked around the room again. The lilac bushes outside were moving in the wind. The house creaked the way old houses do when they're listening. It didn't feel lonely to me. It just felt like home. But I knew better than to argue. There was no point. Once my kids decided something, it didn't matter what I felt. "I'll think about it," I said. "Okay," she said, sounding pleased. "I can come by this weekend, maybe help you go through some things. We'll make a plan." A plan. That's what it always came down to with them. Plans, solutions, arrangements. Never just love, never just time. We talked a few more minutes about small things, the weather, her kids, her work. But the whole conversation felt like a meeting, not a call between mother and daughter. When she finally said goodbye, she sounded lighter. She thought she'd done something good. After I hung up, I sat there for a while with the phone still in my hand. The sun was setting, the sky turning that soft orange color Tom used to love. The house was quiet again. I thought about Lydia's voice, the way she said your prison. I wondered if she even remembered the years I spent fighting to keep this place after her father died. The double shifts, the sacrifices. I wondered if she understood that the only reason she had a nice life now was because I refused to give up this house back then. Maybe she did. Maybe that's what made it easier for her to distance herself now. People don't like being reminded of who they used to need. I stood up and walked into the living room. The pictures on the wall caught the last bit of sunlight. Lydia's wedding photo was still there, her and her husband smiling big, the whole family around them. I reached up and touched the frame. "My prison," I whispered. "If only you knew how hard I fought to build these walls." I sat down on the couch, took out my notebook, and flipped to the page where I'd written about Nathan. Underneath his name, I added a new line. "Day 4, Lydia called. Said my house is a prison, sounded proud of herself. Thinks I'm giving up." Then I wrote one more line below it. "She doesn't know I've already started the test." I closed the notebook, laid it on the table, and exhaled. The house groaned a little, like it was agreeing with me. That night, as I turned off the lights and climbed into bed, I felt something new. Not anger, not sadness. Something steadier, resolve. I was done waiting for love to show up on its own. Now, I was going to make them show me what it was really made of. Sunday night came with a strange kind of quiet. Lydia called earlier in the week and said, "We thought it would be nice to have dinner together this weekend." Her voice sounded sweet, but something about it felt planned. When I pulled into Nathan's driveway, their house looked like one of those magazine homes. Clean, perfect, lifeless. The lights were bright, every corner spotless. There were no toys on the floor, no shoes by the door, nothing out of place. Even the air smelled too perfect, like lemon candles and something fake underneath. Megan opened the door with that polite smile she always wears when she's about to say something I won't like. "Hi, Mom, come in. Dinner's just about ready." Inside, the table was already set. Cloth napkins, polished silverware, glasses lined up perfectly. Nathan stood at the head of the table, flipping through a folder full of papers. Lydia sat beside him, scrolling on her phone. "Sit down, Mom," Nathan said. We have a few things we want to go over with you. That was the moment I knew this wasn't dinner. It was a meeting. I sat down anyway. Megan poured me a glass of water, not wine, and smiled like she was being helpful. We've been talking, Nathan started, straightening the stack of papers in front of him. We just want to make sure you're taken care of. Lydia nodded. We found a wonderful senior living community about half an hour from here. It's really nice. New buildings, good reviews. Megan joined in. They have yoga, art classes, even movie nights. You'll finally be around people your own age. I looked at the three of them sitting there, all talking like I wasn't even in the room. Like they were arranging furniture. Like I was the problem they'd been meaning to solve. The light above the table was cold and bright. It made their faces look pale, almost harsh. I could hear my own breathing between their words. You'll love it there, Lydia said. You won't have to worry about maintenance or the yard or anything like that. Nathan smiled in that way he does when he's trying to sound patient but really just wants control. It's time, Mom. You've done enough on your own. You deserve to relax. Let other people help you. I stared at my glass. The reflection of the chandelier shimmered in the water. I could see my hands in it, older, smaller than I remembered. They kept talking, about costs, about rooms, about how convenient it would be for them if I moved somewhere closer to services. I nodded at the right times, pretending to listen. But all I could think was, they don't see me anymore. We could sell your house while the market's high, Nathan said. Use the money to cover your care comfortably. We'd handle everything. I looked up. You'd handle it? He smiled, confident. Of course. You wouldn't have to lift a finger. I smiled back, small and tight. That sounds wonderful. He didn't hear the sarcasm. Or maybe he didn't care. Lydia reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Mom, this is for the best. We just want you to be safe. Safe. That word again. People always say safe when what they mean is out of the way. I let out a soft breath, nodded again, and said, I'll think about it. Megan looked pleased, like a deal had just been made. Nathan leaned back in his chair, satisfied. Lydia smiled, relieved. But inside, I was already somewhere else, somewhere far quieter than that table. I looked around the room, the marble countertop, the perfectly aligned chairs, the framed family photos on the wall. Not one picture of me in sight. I used to think that was just coincidence. Now I wasn't so sure. When they finished talking, Megan stood up to serve dessert. Another store-bought cake, the same brand as the one from my birthday. I almost laughed. I wasn't sure what flavor you liked, she said. I'm not sure either, I whispered, but no one heard me. They served themselves first, of course, and then handed me a plate. I took one small bite. It was dry, too sweet, like they'd put effort into everything except care. The conversation moved on to other things, Nathan's work, Lydia's kids, a neighbor who'd gotten a new car. Nobody asked how I was doing. Not really. I looked at them and wondered if any of them noticed the way my hands trembled a little when I lifted the fork. Probably not. They were too busy talking about plans and options. That's when I realized what this dinner really was. It wasn't about helping me. It was about control. I set down my fork, folded my napkin, and smiled. You've given me a lot to think about. Nathan nodded, pleased. Good. We'll help you look at places next weekend. I picked up my purse. That's kind of you. Megan asked, You're not staying for coffee? No, thank you. I have a few things to take care of. They didn't stop me. They didn't even walk me to the door. As I stepped outside, the air felt colder than I expected. The night was still. The streetlights hummed softly. I stood by my car for a moment, breathing it all in. The quiet, the distance, the feeling of being unnecessary in my own family's story. I looked back through the dining room window. The three of them were still inside, laughing, already moving on to the next topic. My chair was empty again, just like it had been on my birthday. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table, opened my notebook, and wrote, Day 7, family dinner. Not a dinner, a meeting. They spoke to me like I wasn't there. Plans for my future made without me. Test result number 2, comfort over compassion. I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and whispered to myself, If this is what love looks like now, I'm ready to find out how deep it goes. Then I went to bed. The lilacs outside were swaying in the wind, brushing against the window like they were trying to tell me something. Maybe they were. It was a Thursday afternoon when Nathan showed up. No warning, no call ahead, just his car pulling into the driveway, the sound of his shoes on the porch, and that polite little knock he uses now instead of just walking in like he used to. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door. "Hey, Mom," he said, smiling too wide. "Got a few things we need to go over." He came in holding a thick stack of papers, the kind printed on that heavy white paper that makes everything look official. He set them down on the kitchen table right on top of the newspaper I'd been reading. "Just some forms that'll make things easier," he said, like it was nothing. "It's called power of attorney." I blinked at the words. Power? Of what? He laughed a little, like I just asked something cute. "Don't worry, Mom. It's for your safety. It just lets me handle some things for you in case, something happens. Bills, taxes, paperwork, just to make sure nothing slips through the cracks." I sat down slowly, my eyes on the papers. His tone was calm, casual, almost kind, but his eyes didn't match his voice. They were sharp, focused, like he was watching to see if I'd resist. He pushed the top page toward me and handed me a pen. "It's just routine stuff," he said. "You always trust me, right, Mom?" Those words hit me harder than he probably meant them to, because I'd heard them before. 20 years ago, when he and Megan were trying to buy their first house, the bank wouldn't approve the loan on their own. He came over one night, all soft and desperate. "Mom, you've got the credit. Just sign this, please. It's temporary." And I did. Of course I did. Because that's what mothers do. Now he was saying it again in that same voice, but colder. "You always trust me, right, Mom?" Only this time it didn't sound like a question. It sounded like a reminder. I smiled and picked up the first page. The print was small, too small for eyes my age. I had to squint to make sense of the words. Full financial authorization. Property management rights. Transfer of ownership in case of incapacitation. I didn't understand every term, but I understood enough. "What's all this mean?" I asked. Nathan leaned against the counter, crossed his arms. "It just means I can handle your finances if something ever happens to you. It's just smart planning, Mom. You wouldn't believe how many scams target people your age." He said your age like it was a disease. I nodded slowly. "That's thoughtful of you." He smiled again, relieved. "Exactly. So go ahead and sign. I'll file it tomorrow." I flipped through another page, pretending to read while I kept my voice calm. "I'll read it tonight, dear." His smile faltered a little. "You don't have to do that. It's all standard stuff." "I'd still like to," I said. He laughed under his breath. "Mom, you won't understand half of it anyway." I looked up at him and smiled back. "That's what you think." He shrugged, took a sip of his coffee, and pretended not to notice that I was still holding the papers, not signing them. When he left, he kissed my cheek, quick and distracted. "I'll stop by tomorrow," he said. "We'll finish it up." "Of course," I said softly. When the door closed behind him, I stood there for a while, just looking at the table. The papers sat there, neat and white against the old wood. The house felt smaller somehow, like the walls had shifted closer. That night, I made myself a cup of tea, turned on the lamp in the corner, and sat down. I put the stack of papers beside me and started reading. The print was so small it made my eyes ache. I had to trace the lines with my finger just to keep track. Every paragraph sounded harmless at first. Words about assistance, support, oversight. But underneath all the polite language, I could feel what it really meant. It meant giving up control. It meant letting my own son decide what I could or couldn't do with my life. I flipped another page. Authorization to manage all financial accounts in the event of incapacity. Authorization to transfer or liquidate property as needed. It was all there, buried under kindness. Halfway through, I had to stop and rub my eyes. I remembered sitting at the same table years ago, signing the mortgage papers for Nathan's house. Back then, he'd thanked me with tears in his eyes. "You saved us, Mom," he said. "I'll never forget it." But he did. Now, the same son who once needed my name on a loan wanted to put his on my life. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the papers again. The lamplight made them glow faintly yellow. For a second, I thought about tearing them up. But no, that would be too simple. Instead, I folded them neatly, slid them back into the envelope, and wrote one sentence across the back in pencil: "If love has fine print, it's not love. Then I set it beside the lamp, turned off the light, and sat there in the dark for a while, listening to the sound of the house settling around me. The walls creaked, the clock ticked, the lilacs brushed against the window. It was strange, but I didn't feel scared. I felt awake. That night, before I went to bed, I opened my notebook and wrote, Day 10, Nathan brought papers. Said it's for my safety. Said I wouldn't understand anyway. Test result number 3, protection disguised as power. I closed the book and whispered, We'll see who understands what, my dear. The next morning, I was sitting in the kitchen, still staring at that envelope of papers Nathan had left on the table. I hadn't touched it since the night before. I was just sitting there with my coffee, thinking about how strange it felt to be afraid of your own child. Then there was a knock at the door. 3 soft knocks. Familiar. When I opened it, there stood Virginia Cross, or Ginny, as everyone called her. She lived 2 houses down with her husband, Dean. I'd known them for years. Mostly waves from the porch, small talk about weather and gardening, but we'd never really sat down and talked. She was holding a pie, still warm, wrapped in one of those old checkered towels. Morning, Lucille, she said, smiling. Heard your kids are planning to sell your house. That true? I blinked, surprised. Seems so, I said, half laughing, half sighing. She shook her head and stepped inside before I could even invite her. Honey, don't let anyone make you smaller than you are. I smiled, a little embarrassed. Coffee? Always, she said, setting the pie down like she owned the place. I poured 2 mugs, and she cut us each a slice. It smelled like cinnamon and butter. Real butter, not the cheap kind. For the first time in a long while, the kitchen smelled like life again. We sat down at the table, and she looked around the room, her eyes soft, but knowing. Dean said your son came over yesterday with paperwork, she said quietly. That true, too? I nodded. Power of attorney, he said. For my safety. Ginny raised her eyebrows. Oh, honey? That's how it starts. I frowned. How what starts? She took a slow sip of coffee before answering. People think they know what's best for you. Then one day, you wake up and realize they've made all your decisions for you. We sat in silence for a bit, just the clock ticking, and the sound of a car passing outside. Then she said, Dean and I know how it feels. Our son sold our land without asking. Took years to forgive him. I looked at her stunned. He sold it? Without permission? Oh, he had the papers, she said bitterly. We signed them, just like you almost did. He said it was to make things easier. That hit me like a cold wave. The same words Nathan had used. Make things easier. Ginny looked at me, her eyes kind but sharp. You worked your whole life for that house, Lucille. Don't you dare let anyone take it from you. People forget what mothers give until there's nothing left to take. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded. My throat felt tight. Dean showed up a little later with his old tool belt. He said Ginny told him my porch roof was sagging. I hadn't even mentioned it. Don't want it falling on you, he said. Give me 20 minutes and a hammer. He was out there all afternoon humming to himself while he worked. Ginny stayed inside, folding the dish towel, talking, like we'd been friends for years. She asked about Tom, about my teaching days, about the lilacs. Not once did she mention money or houses or what I planned to do next. She just listened. That evening when Dean was done, I brought out lemonade. We sat on the porch together, the 3 of us, watching the sun dip behind the trees. The light turned golden, the kind of light that makes everything look softer than it is. Dean wiped his hands and said, Feels good to help someone who deserves it. I smiled. I don't know how to thank you. Ginny laughed. You can thank us by eating that pie before it goes bad. We all laughed. It felt strange at first, like my face had forgotten how to, but it felt good too. As the sun went down, the porch light flickered on automatically, and Ginny patted my hand. You know, she said softly, when our son sold the farm, I thought that was the end of everything. But it wasn't. We found new people, new places. Sometimes the family you need isn't the one you're born with. It's the one that shows up when you're breaking. I didn't say anything for a long time. Her words sat heavy in the air. When they left that night, I stood at the door and watched them walk back home, arm in arm. The street was quiet except for the sound of crickets. I looked down at my hands, still holding the empty coffee mug, and realized they weren't shaking anymore. Inside, I set the mug on the counter, cut myself another slice of pie, and sat back at the table. For the first time in months, I wasn't eating alone. The house felt different somehow, warmer, like it was breathing again. I thought about Ginny's words. Don't let anyone make you smaller than you are. I looked around the kitchen, at the old table, the pictures on the wall, the little notes Tom used to leave me, and whispered to myself, not anymore. Before bed, I opened my notebook and wrote, Day 11, Virginia Cross stopped by with pie. Told me not to let anyone make me smaller. Test result number 4, strangers show more love than blood. I turned off the lamp, and for once the quiet didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace. It had been 3 quiet weeks since Ginny and Dean started stopping by. They'd check on me almost every other day, bringing soup, helping with the garden, or just sitting on the porch with me while the sun went down. It felt good, almost like having family again, the kind that didn't ask for anything in return. Then one afternoon the mail came. Usually it's nothing, bills, coupons, some catalog I never ordered, but that day there was a thick white envelope sitting on top of the pile. It was heavier than the others. The return address said Colin Monroe, attorneys at law. At first, I thought it was another thing from the insurance company. My heart skipped a beat before I even opened it, but when I tore the edge and slid the letter out, I saw a name I hadn't thought about in years, Agnes Monroe. I had to sit down. The letter began politely. Mrs. Garner, we are writing to inform you that your late friend, Mrs. Agnes Monroe, has included you as a beneficiary in her will. I blinked a few times, thinking maybe I'd read it wrong. I hadn't seen Agnes since before Tom passed. We used to teach together at Mapleford Elementary. She was sharp and funny, one of those women who said what everyone else was afraid to. After her husband died, she moved to Florida. We exchanged Christmas cards for a while, then time just happened. I read the letter again, slower this time. Inside the envelope was a short list of what she'd left me. 1 single-story home in Palm Haven, Florida. Savings account totaling $250,000. My hands started shaking. I turned to the last page. There at the bottom was a note in handwriting I recognized instantly, her handwriting. The same careful cursive she used on the chalkboard back when we taught side by side. You once said you wanted to see the ocean again. Now you can. That's when I started to cry. Not because of the money, not because of the house, but because someone remembered. Someone remembered me. I hadn't said that out loud in years. It must have been during one of those late afternoons in the teacher's lounge when the kids were gone and the building was too quiet. I told her that after Tom and I retired, I wanted to see the ocean again. Just once, the way we did on our honeymoon. And now, years later, she was gone, and somehow she'd made that dream possible for me. I pressed the letter to my chest and just sat there, letting the tears come. It wasn't sadness, exactly. It was something softer, something like gratitude mixed with disbelief. That night I called Ginny. You won't believe what came in the mail today. When I told her, she let out a long whistle. Well, would you look at that, she said. Some people just don't forget the good ones, Lucille. I laughed through my tears. I guess not. You going to keep the house? She asked. I didn't answer right away. I looked at the letter again, at Agnes's words. See the ocean? Again. I don't know, I said finally. Maybe I'll visit. Maybe I'll just go see what it looks like. You should, Ginny said. You owe it to yourself. After we hung up, I read the letter again. Every word, every line. Then I took the small photo of Agnes and me from the old teaching days, the one where we were both laughing, covered in chalk dust, and I placed it next to the letter. I found a small picture frame in the drawer, the kind Tom used to use for his fishing licenses. It was scratched but still decent. I slipped the letter inside, pressed the glass down, and set it on the bookshelf beside the framed picture of him. It looked right there, like a promise keeping company with another promise. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about the sound of waves, the smell of salt, the warmth of sand under my feet. I hadn't felt those things in 40 years. When Tom and I went to the ocean for the first time, I remember saying I could live there forever. He laughed and said, "We'll come back when we're old and free." He never got the chance, but maybe I still could. Before I went to bed, I opened my notebook again and wrote, Day 31, letter from Colin Monroe. Agnes Monroe remembered me. House in Palm Haven, Florida. $250,000 in savings. Final note, You once said you wanted to see the ocean again. Now you can. Test result number 5. Real love remembers even when time forgets. I closed the notebook and turned off the light. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel as lonely as before. For the first time in a long time, I felt like the universe had handed me a small, quiet kind of justice. Not revenge, not luck. Just a reminder that kindness doesn't always come from the people you expect. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to start thinking about the ocean. Nathan called on a Thursday afternoon. His voice was polite, measured, too polite. Mom, we need to talk. We've consulted a financial attorney. His name's Thomas Reddick. He'll join us for a quick chat. He didn't ask if I wanted to meet. He told me. I said, "Of course, dear. Come by tomorrow. I'll make tea." That night I didn't sleep much. I already knew what this meeting would be. Another discussion about my safety, my future, my supposed confusion. I made peace with it before they even arrived. The next afternoon they came as a group. Nathan, Megan, and Lydia, dressed like they were going to a business meeting. Mr. Reddick came with them, carrying a leather briefcase and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I served tea and cookies, the way my mother taught me, because no matter what's happening, you still offer kindness. Mr. Reddick opened his briefcase and laid out a stack of documents. His tone was smooth, practiced. "Mrs. Garner, these papers are designed to protect you from financial scams and poor decision-making. They're very standard for someone in your situation." Someone in your situation. I've heard that phrase too many times lately. I looked at Megan first. Her polite smile was gone. Her eyes were sharp, watching me closely. Lydia stared down at her cup. Nathan looked confident, like he was leading a team meeting. "So," I said, "you think I'm losing my mind?" Nathan laughed softly like I'd said something silly. "Of course not, Mom. We're just being proactive. You have a lot to manage now. The house, the taxes, all those bills. We just want to help." I sipped my tea slowly. "Help?" I repeated. "That's a nice word." Mr. Reddick leaned forward, sliding the papers across the table. "If you'll just sign these, we can make sure your finances are handled properly. It's all about protecting your assets." Protecting my assets. Funny how that never mattered when I was short on $2,000. I let the silence stretch. The ticking of the kitchen clock filled the air. Then, without a word, I reached for the drawer beside me and pulled out a different stack of papers, neatly folded, sealed with a small gold clip. Their eyes followed my hands. "What's that?" Nathan asked. I laid the papers flat on the table. The heading read, "Deed of Property Transfer, Palm Haven, Florida." Mr. Reddick stopped mid-sentence. Megan's mouth tightened. Lydia's eyes widened. "I already made my own protection," I said. The room went still. "What did you do?" Nathan's voice wasn't calm anymore. "I moved my life," I said quietly, "to a place where you can't sign it away." Megan leaned forward. "Mom, you didn't have to do that. You should have told us." I shook my head. "No, I shouldn't have." Nathan tried to keep his tone even, but the anger was there. "This isn't rational, Mom. You don't even know anyone in Florida." I smiled. "That's the point." Mr. Reddick cleared his throat. "Mrs. Garner, these kinds of decisions can have serious legal implications. We just want to make sure you're not being taken advantage of." I looked him straight in the eye. "I've already been taken advantage of, Mr. Reddick, just not by strangers." He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Megan looked away. Lydia's eyes were glassy, like she wanted to say something but couldn't. Nathan stood up. "Mom, please don't do this. You're making a mistake." I stood too, slowly. "You taught me not to trust people easily, Nathan. Congratulations, I finally learned." No one said anything after that. I walked them to the door, just like I always do. Megan mumbled a quick goodbye. Lydia hugged me half-heartedly. Nathan didn't touch me at all. He just said, "You'll regret this." When the door closed, I leaned against it and let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The house was quiet again. My house. For now. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The air was cool, the sky still pale blue. I made a pot of coffee and packed a small suitcase. Just the essentials. A few changes of clothes, my notebook, Tom's old photo, and the letter from Agnes. When I stepped outside, Ginny and Dean were already there, standing by their porch with a thermos of coffee. Ginny waved and walked over. "You sure you don't want us to drive you, Lucille?" I smiled. "I need to do this alone." She nodded and hugged me tight. Then you drive safe. And when you see that ocean, you think of us." Dean handed me the thermos. "Hot coffee for the road?" I thanked them, got in my car, and sat for a moment before starting the engine. The radio came on softly, some old tune from the 1960s. "You'll Never Walk Alone." I laughed a little. Maybe that was Agnes's way of saying goodbye. As I drove down Willow Lane, the lilacs were blooming again. The sunlight hit the roof of my old house, turning it gold for just a second. I glanced at it in the rear view mirror until it disappeared behind the trees. "They said I was running away," I whispered to myself. "Maybe I am. But sometimes running is how you save yourself." The road opened up ahead, wide and endless. The sky turned pink. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel trapped. I didn't feel small. I felt free. The house in Palm Haven sat between two tall palm trees that swayed even when the wind was soft. The paint was pale yellow, the shutters light blue. It looked small from the outside, but it felt open, like the air here didn't know how to stay still. When I stepped out of the car, the first thing I noticed was the sound. Not silence like back home, but waves, steady and low, like breathing. I stood there for a moment, just listening. For the first time in years, I didn't feel out of place. I didn't feel watched. I didn't feel old. Inside, everything smelled like new paint and ocean air. There were boxes on the floor, labeled neatly by the movers, but the house already felt lived in. Maybe because it wasn't full of other people's expectations, just mine. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the countertops, the windowsills. The floors creaked a little, but it was a kind of friendly creak, a reminder that even new places have their own history waiting to start. In the living room, a wide window faced the ocean. I went straight to it, grabbed the curtains, and pulled them open. Light rushed in like water, filling every corner. I stood there, eyes half closed, breathing it in. The air was warm and a little salty. It smelled like freedom. Freedom doesn't always come loud, I said to myself. Sometimes it just smells like salt and wind. The sound of gulls echoed outside. Somewhere down the street, a neighbor was playing an old radio tune. It sounded like something from the time Tom and I were young. I smiled without meaning to. On the kitchen table, the movers had set down a few boxes marked personal. I opened one and found the framed letter from Agnes Monroe, the one I'd kept near my bed in Mapleford. Her handwriting still looked strong, steady. Next to it was a small note I hadn't noticed before, tucked between the pages of her old recipe book that the lawyers had sent along with the deed. It was written in the same pen, same careful hand. "Don't let them shrink you, Lucy." I read it twice. She'd always called me Lucy, even when I told her it made me sound younger than I was. She said, "That's the point." I set the note against the frame right beside her picture and smiled. That afternoon, I unpacked slowly. The small things came out first, a few dishes, my teapot, the old photo of Tom and me from our honeymoon. I set it by the window so he could see the ocean again, just like we'd planned all those years ago. When evening came, I made tea and carried it out to the porch. The sky was pink and gold, the water glowing like glass. I sat down in the rocking chair that came with the house. It creaked with every gentle wave of motion, and watched the horizon. It hit me then quietly that nobody knew where I was. Not Nathan, not Lydia. Nobody was checking on me, telling me what to do, asking for anything. And instead of fear, what I felt was peace. I thought about everything that had led here, the birthdays that weren't celebrations, the dinners that turned into meetings, the papers on the table, the words that still stung. Burden, prison, protection. They used to echo in my head. Now, the sound of the ocean washed them away. I didn't hate them. Not anymore. I just finally understood them. People see what they fear most in others. My children feared weakness, and I'd shown them mine for too long. They mistook love for need. But I wasn't weak. I was just tired. Now, for the first time in years, I wasn't anyone's responsibility. I wasn't part of their plans or their fears. I was just me. I finished my tea and walked down the small path to the beach. The sand was soft, cool under my feet. The tide came in slow and quiet. I stood there and let the water touch my toes. Tom would have loved this. Agnes knew that. Somehow, even from miles and years away, she'd remembered what I needed before I did. I looked up at the wide, open sky and whispered, "Thank you, Agnes, for remembering me when I forgot myself." As the last light faded, I turned back toward the house. The windows were glowing warm behind me. It didn't look lonely. It looked alive. Before going inside, I took one last deep breath, salt, wind, warmth, and said softly, "This is what free feels like." Later, as I wrote in my notebook, I paused for a long time before the last line. Then I wrote it exactly as it came to me. Day 60, moved into Palm Haven. The air smells like salt and sunlight. I finally understand what peace means. Final test result. Love may fail you, but freedom never lies. I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and let the sound of the ocean carry me to sleep. For the first time in a long, long time, I dreamed of nothing but the sea. It was late afternoon when someone knocked on the door. Not loud, just 3 slow, steady knocks. When I opened it, a man stood there holding a small pot of daisies. He looked to be around my age, maybe a little older. Sun-browned skin, gray hair tied back loosely, kind eyes. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said with a gentle smile. "Name's Dale Morales. I live 2 houses down." He handed me the daisies before I could even respond. "Welcome to Palm Haven. My wife used to plant these out front. Thought you might like some color for your porch?" I took the flowers carefully. "That's very kind of you." "My wife would have wanted me to," he said quietly. "She was a teacher too, 3rd grade. Passed away 3 years ago." For a second, the silence between us was soft, not heavy, just understanding. 2 people who'd both known loss, meeting halfway through it. I invited him in for tea. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Sure, I could use a break from fixing that stubborn fence." Inside, we sat by the big window facing the ocean. The sunlight came through just right, warm and gold. He looked around the room and smiled. "You got a good place here. Feels peaceful already." "I think so too," I said. "Still getting used to it." We talked for hours. It didn't feel like conversation, it was more like breathing. He told me about the sea turtles that nest a few miles down the beach, about how the locals all know which weeks to leave their porch lights off so the hatchlings don't get confused. He talked about the calm mornings when the ocean looks like glass, and the evenings when the horizon turns orange like fire. "You learn to live slower here," he said. "The tide decides the schedule. You stop fighting time and just let it move around you." I listened. I didn't realize how much I missed just listening. When he asked where I'd moved from, I told him about Mapleford, about the lilacs, the quiet street, the old house I'd left behind. I told him I used to teach like his wife and that I once believed home meant staying put. "So, why'd you leave?" he asked gently. I hesitated. I could have told him about the papers, the lies, the looks. But I just said, "I guess I realized I couldn't grow in a place that kept me small." He nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "I know that one." For a long time, we just watched the ocean. The sound of waves filled the spaces between words. At some point, I found myself talking about things I hadn't said out loud in years. About Tom, about the kids, about the quiet kind of grief that doesn't show. I told him that after Tom died, I lost more than a husband. I lost direction. Then, slowly, I lost my children's warmth too. And after that, I lost myself. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer advice. He just listened, the way people used to before the world got too loud. When I finally stopped talking, he looked out, toward the water, and said softly, "Then you're in the right place. The ocean's good at giving people back to themselves." Something about the way he said it made me believe him. After he left, I stood by the door for a moment, holding the little pot of daisies. The petals were bright yellow, reaching toward the window light. I set them on the porch rail where the breeze could touch them. The house felt different again, not because someone had visited, but because for the first time, I wasn't just remembering connection, I'd felt it. That night, I made dinner for one, roasted vegetables and a small piece of fish from the market. I turned on some quiet music, the kind Tom used to hum along to. As I ate, I looked out at the water and thought about what Dale said. The ocean really did have a way of making things feel right again. Not by fixing what was broken, but by reminding you that broken things can still move, still float, still find their way. Before bed, I wrote in my notebook, Day 75, met my neighbor, Dale Morales. Brought daisies, lost his wife, also a teacher. He said the ocean gives people back to themselves. I believe him. Test result number 6. Sometimes healing doesn't come from family. It comes from a knock on the door. I closed the notebook and set it beside Agnes's letter. The ocean breeze came through the open window, carrying that clean, salty air. As I drifted off to sleep, I realized something simple but true. I wasn't waiting for anyone's call anymore. Not Nathan's, not Lydia's, not anyone's. For the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't missing anyone. I was right where I was supposed to be. It was late morning when the phone rang. The sun was coming through the curtains in that soft way it does here in Palm Haven. Gentle, like light filtered through time. I didn't recognize the number at first. Then I saw the area code. Mapleford. My chest tightened just a little before I answered. Hello? There was a pause. Then a familiar voice. Mom, it's me. Lydia's. For a moment I couldn't say anything. I hadn't heard her voice since the day they left my kitchen, papers still sitting unsigned on the table. Hi, sweetheart, I said finally. How are you? She hesitated. I could hear movement in the background. Maybe dishes or the sound of a TV turned low. I'm fine. I just wanted to check in. Nathan's furious. He says you embarrass the family. I couldn't help but laugh a little softly. Tell him it's not humiliation, darling. It's liberation. There was silence. Long, careful silence. I could almost picture her standing in her kitchen, biting her lip the way she used to when she was unsure of something. Mom, she said after a while, you really left, didn't you? I did, I said. And I'm glad I did. I think I finally did something just for me. She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was smaller. Are you happy? I looked around the room, at the light falling across the floor, the open window, the breeze that smelled like salt. Yes, I said softly, for the first time in years. There was a small sound on the other end of the line, like she was trying not to cry. I miss you, she said finally. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice steady. Then come visit. Palm Haven's big enough for two. She let out a shaky laugh. Nathan would never forgive me. Then come when you're ready, I said. Forgiveness doesn't have to happen first. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The ocean waves outside filled the silence between us. Mom, she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know it had gotten that bad. I thought we were helping. I know you did, I said. That's what makes it hurt less. Do you hate us? I smiled. No, sweetheart. I don't have the energy for hate. I'm too busy breathing. She laughed through her tears. You sound different. I feel different, I said. The air here's lighter. Maybe that's all I needed. Maybe one day, she said softly, I'll come see it. Maybe one day, I repeated. When we hung up, I sat for a while with the phone still in my hand. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel empty. It felt full of everything I'd finally made space for. I thought about Lydia, how careful she'd been, even when she was trying to help. I thought about Nathan, all sharp edges and pride, too afraid of losing control to see what he'd already lost. And I thought about me, the woman who used to wait by the phone for her children's silence. Now I was answering it on my own terms. I made tea and carried it to the porch. The ocean was calm that morning, soft waves curling at the shore. Somewhere down the street, Dale was trimming his hedges, and Ginny's wind chimes were singing in the breeze. I sat there and let the sound of it all wash over me. The life I'd built, the quiet I'd earned, the peace I hadn't realized I'd been chasing. Sometimes people ask me if I ever think about going back to Mapleford, back to the house on Willow Lane. I always say no, not because I hate what's there, but because I've already said everything I needed to say. That house taught me love. Losing it taught me freedom. Before going inside, I picked up my notebook and wrote one more line. Day 120, Lydia called. Nathan's angry, Lydia's not sure, but she asked if I'm happy. I said yes, and I meant it. Test result number 7. Sometimes love can't follow you into peace, but it can still find its way back later. I set the notebook down beside the framed note from Agnes. Don't let them shrink you, Lucy. The sunlight caught the glass, and for a moment it looked like the words were glowing. I smiled. Then I closed the window, poured the rest of my tea, and whispered to the quiet room, maybe one day. The air was soft that evening, the kind that smells like salt and orange light. I walked along the beach, my bare feet sinking into the cool sand. The waves came in slow, steady, unbothered by everything people worry about. The wind caught my hair, lifting the silver strands around my face. I didn't fix it. Let it tangle, I thought. Let it do what it wants. I'd spent too many years trying to hold things in place. A little boy ran past me, chasing a red ball that the wind had stolen. His laughter was loud, pure. Then he tripped and fell face first into the sand. Before I even thought about it, I bent down and helped him up. He blinked up at me, brushing sand off his shirt. "You okay, sweetheart?" I asked. He nodded shyly. His mother came running over, her sandals kicking up little clouds of dust. She scooped him up and smiled at me. "Thank you, ma'am." I smiled back. "No trouble at all." They walked away, hand in hand, the boy still laughing, already forgetting the fall. I stood there watching them until they disappeared down the beach. Then I realized my chest felt warm, the good kind of ache. It's funny, I thought. Sometimes strangers remind you what family used to mean. I kept walking. The sky was turning gold, then pink, then that soft blue that comes right before dusk. The light hit the surface of the water and shimmered like melted metal, shifting, alive. Every step I took made the sand whisper beneath me. I thought about all the steps that had brought me here, the house I left, the papers I didn't sign, the voices I stopped waiting to hear. There was a time when silence hurt, when it filled every room and felt like punishment. But standing here, with the ocean breathing in front of me, silence didn't hurt anymore. It felt full, gentle, healing. I sat down near the edge of the water, letting the waves brush my feet. Somewhere behind me, I could hear music playing faintly from a beach cafe, something slow and familiar. I closed my eyes and listened. To the water, the wind, the sound of children far down the shore, and the steady rhythm of my own heart keeping time with it all. For the first time in so long, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was thinking about what I'd found. Peace, stillness, a life that didn't need permission. I opened my eyes and watched the sun slide lower into the horizon. The whole ocean turned gold. For a moment, I almost felt like Tom was there beside me. Not as a ghost, but as a memory resting easy at last. "We made it," I whispered. A breeze moved across the water, cool and sweet. I pulled my sweater tighter and smiled. Maybe freedom wasn't about leaving everything behind. Maybe it was about coming back to yourself. As the last bit of sunlight disappeared, I stood up and started walking home, back toward the little yellow house with the blue shutters, where Agnes's letter sat framed on the table and the daisies Dale had given me were blooming by the porch. The tide came in behind me, washing away my footprints. I looked over my shoulder once just to see them fade and thought, that's all right, I know where I've been. When I reached the porch, the sky had turned a deep violet. The first stars were out. I could hear the ocean from inside, steady as breath. Before turning off the light, I wrote my final note in the little book that had carried me through all these months. Day 180, evening by the shore. Helped a child up from the sand. His mother thanked me. For the first time, silence doesn't hurt. It heals. I closed the notebook and set it on the windowsill. The sound of the ocean drifted in, soft and endless. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything. I was already home. The morning light comes early in Palm Haven. I sit on the porch with my cup of tea, watching the steam rise and mix with the cool air. The ocean is calm today, soft waves rolling in, quiet as breathing. The camera moves slowly, catching the way the sunlight turns everything gold, the porch rail, the palm leaves, the edge of the cup in my hands. The world feels new again. I take a sip, close my eyes, and let the sound of the ocean fill the silence. There's peace in that sound, not the kind that comes from running away, but the kind that comes from finally stopping. The voiceover begins, my voice, older, softer now, but sure. Sometimes love fails the test, but faith doesn't. I lost a family that forgot me, and found a world that didn't. The camera lingers on the waves, on the small daisies blooming in the morning light, on the framed note from Agnes sitting by the window. Don't let them shrink you, Lucy. The piano plays softly, slow, gentle chords, rising with the rhythm of the tide. No big ending, just breath, just calm. The camera begins to pull back, from the porch to the house, to the street lined with palms. Further still until the whole coastline of Palm Haven glows under the sunrise, pink, orange, gold. A few lines appear in voiceover, fading in with the light. Peace doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without pain. Sometimes the life you were meant to live is waiting, just one brave choice away. The sound of the waves grows louder, blending into the piano. The frame slows, The light brightens until the screen glows almost white. Then, silence. Only the horizon remains, a single line of gold across the sea. The final voiceover comes, barely above a whisper. Wherever you are, don't let anyone make you smaller than you are. The music fades. The screen lingers on the sunlight a moment longer, then dissolves into the final title card, Palm Haven's Sunrise. A story of love, loss, and the quiet kind of freedom.